Good evening, curious people of the internet. Welcome back to the Entrepreneur's Kitchen. This is Friday. This is another live episode of the Entrepreneur's Kitchen. Tonight with Mr. Michael Kramarsch. Hello, Michael.
Hi, Cedar. Greetings to Salzburg from Frankfurt.
Thank you. Greetings back. Well, Michael, let me introduce you briefly for the audience who is watching us tonight. You are one of the most prominent people in the HR scene, actually quite worldwide, but especially in German-speaking lands. And you're not only interested in, bringing HR and compensation topics forward, but also you invest in startups. You have started your own HR competition for startups. And you are also interested in the ethical uses of technology when it comes to the realm of HR. So we're going to be talking about many of those topics, of course, because you're such a prominent person in that scene. But how about food?
Oh, I love food, and actually I'm a passionate cook myself. So I found myself very restricted, Seda, when you said it's only 3 ingredients. But no, in reality, I'm responsible for the cooking at home. My wife can't cook. Which I know before we married, so I can't hold against her. Yes, but that's my kitchen, Seda, if you so will.
Oh, that is awesome. So it's truly an entrepreneur's kitchen and you're the main person to prepare the food. So what are your ingredients then?
My ingredients tonight is, as I'm very limited, you can see a cauliflower, which is, it needs to be in the oven for a while, up to 2 hours. And you will see there is a cool texture of the leaves in the outside, the flowers itself, and it's just oil, a little bit of butter and salt. That's all. And then I prepared, it's back there. We will do some pizza bread. So it is cauliflower, flour, little bit of butter and herbs. So I hope I fit your concept, Cedar.
It's more than perfect because, we don't really count salt and pepper and, herbs unless it's, we'll take it.
Yeah, and it's not my, I don't want to praise myself here. It's actually from a cooking book. And there is a very famous cook, some people may know him, Otto Lengi. He typically does very complicated stuff, but he wrote a book that is called Simple. And the recipe I'm doing tonight is from this cooking book. So credits go to him.
Excellent. Well done. So my recipe.
What are you doing, Cedar? Yeah.
Yeah, my recipe is a Turkish recipe. This is an eggplant, a really, really beautiful eggplant. Look at this eggplant. Isn't this beautiful?
Absolutely.
Then I have some fleur de sel, but salt doesn't count. Garlic and yogurt.
Oh, so, that's cool as well.
Exactly. I'm going to be making something that my Turkish family does all the time. You just fry the eggplant, put some fleur de sel and garlic yogurt on top, and it's the best, delicious, starter, for instance. You can make it as a starter.
It's when you're sitting with friends and grabbing some food, having a glass of wine, a lot of laughter, and a nice evening.
Perfect. Absolutely. Well, since we've just spoken about the food and what we will be preparing, you can just, work in the background. I want to let the people who are watching our stream tonight know that you guys are welcome to join the conversation. Our Slido code is 73457. Just go to slido.com or slide.do and enter this event number 73457, and you can just join the conversation with me and Michael. Well, Michael, you have so many different hats. And in your background, you have been in the consultancy business for a very, very long time, and started your own business and did the entrepreneurship. And you're also a passionate arts visitor. That's actually one of the reasons why we met, right?
Indeed.
Exactly. So let's talk about your interest in arts a little bit.
When it comes to arts, I'm more a watcher than a doer. And when it comes to music, it's even more frustrating, because I'm when I'm coming from a very musical affine family, and my mother tried when I was young to bring me into some classes. I didn't pass the rhythmic clapping, so that's my level of doing music actively. But I like to hear music, and the worst thing is I hear every wrong tone for whatever reason. So when I'm singing or doing music, it's like sort of waterboarding myself, because I can hear all the wrong sounds directly into my ear. So one of the reasons I started cooking, actually, it's because it's an art where the outcome sometimes is close to what I envision, which I'm not able to do in painting. But I like to visit museums, and we do that in every place we go. And we also like music. We are involved here in Frankfurt in the club for the Old Opera, Friends of the Old Opera here in Frankfurt. We are not going there every week or so, but it's something that we do passionately. And we also, of course, I'm from Vienna, Austria originally, before moving to Germany. So Salzburg is very close to my heart, and I've been there for decades. Mostly, I have to admit, over Easter, not over summer. It's a little bit too crowded for me.
Well, what do you think about all of the disruption in the arts industry right now because of the global pandemic? I mean, we're all sitting at home, kind of trying to occupy ourselves. But I recently seen something that was really weird and weirdly funny at the same time. In Singapore, there was this survey being published by a daily paper where people said the most unnecessary job was the job of an artist. On the other hand, you can't live without the arts. So how do you see this situation?
That's actually, and I'm being from Austria, I'm reading Austrian newspapers in addition a lot, and the discussion was interestingly more intense in Austria than it was in Germany. But indeed, there were some, let's say, silent victims of that pandemic, and musicians, all sort of arts being performed, having no visitors, being closed now for weeks and months. And we shall not forget that this is, not only the artists, but also all the services associated with it. So there is a real crisis going on. And as you rightly said, you don't, and that has always been a discussion, you don't need art to still your physical hunger, but your brain hunger and your heart and your stomach. And I believe many people by now are missing a lot what has been happening before that pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for being in Salzburg, that must be very, very visible, as there are only very few visitors allowed, etc.
Yes, absolutely. That's true. I mean, this whole pandemic crisis, of course, opened up all of these inequalities in, different parts of the society, and now the differences have become even more apparent, also in the arts, etc. But I'm also imagining that in your business, in the human resources realm, there must have been a very, very interesting discussion now around, the compensation. Particularly, I'm thinking about this recent half scandal, because they were able to take it back, of the Austrian Airlines while kind of being on a state help, still paying out bonuses, etc. So in such a crisis situation, how do you see the top managers and board members should be behaving?
Actually, what I see is a very different patterns than we saw back in the financial crisis about 10 years ago, because I have some statistical numbers that I know. I believe it's more than a third now of the biggest European companies where management offered some pay cuts voluntarily or donated money. And that's all rooted in a new understanding that a corporation is not an island by itself, but it's embedded in a society. It needs a license to operate, if you so will. And that license to operate also is reflected by the opinion and the motivation of your own colleagues and the outside world. And when you force, to some extent, your colleagues to go on Kurzarbeit, on short work arrangements, and by that losing money, then I believe it's a sort of gesture that doesn't cost a lot, but has a high return to offer as a sign of solidarity. And we saw many managers doing that, which is very different from a couple of years ago, Seda.
How was it in the financial crisis? Nobody cared?
The financial crisis was a little bit different because it started, of course, in the banks, and then the political regulation and pay cuts in banks and caps of pay in banks that got some state funds to help them through the crisis. But the overall industry was not so severely impacted like now with the pandemic, when nearly all countries closed down their business for weeks or even months. And I believe it's also we are entering a decade of stakeholder orientation. You can see that by, Larry Fink, he is the boss of BlackRock, the largest global investor, and he sends out the letter annually to CEOs. And what he's talking about is not financial performance. He's talking about ESG, environmental, social governance targets, or non-financial targets. He's talking about that license to operate. It's not that all investors become good people overnight, and performance still matters, but it's a multidimensional definition of performance instead of shareholder value only that it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, what you're referring to is, I think, the Business Roundtable statement of 2019. I really want to talk about that statement as well, because I find it really interesting on the one hand, because of the reasons you just mentioned. On the other hand, though, to some people, we should dig a little deeper, because it's about the accountability and about the truth behind that kind of statement, whether that's actually doable after having structured our companies and economies in such a way that it compensates different things than.
Yeah, what you're referring to, Seda, is that a group of US CEOs just last year in the US published a statement where they said it's not shareholder value only, it's also stakeholder value, which was very surprising to the world. And it's more an approach that we try to follow in Europe. I believe at the moment it's stakeholder value US style, which may be a little bit different than what we typically understand from a European perspective. But it's also clear evidence that responsible business leaders are looking beyond the borders of their own firm and understanding that you're part of a much larger ecosystem.
Yeah, and how would you differentiate the mindset in those terms between US and Europe?
I believe in Europe, and just take Germany as example. In the corporate law, or in the worded corporate governance rules, there has always been a paradigm that talks about stakeholder value. So it's leading the company with a multi-perspective, whereas in the US, the clear strategic understanding in the past was it's all about shareholder value, and all other targets are at the lower hierarchical level, whereas Europe always had a multi-perspective at the highest strategic level, or sometimes even in the regulation.
That's very interesting. Correct me if I'm wrong, but does also this personal accountability and responsibility of, for instance, the German board members, the executive board, etc., does that also play a role? And if yes, can you just, for the sake of explanation, tell the difference between a German board and a US board?
Yeah, I don't think our cooking allows for too much techniques on that.
Yes, please.
But the major difference is that especially in Germany, you have a two-tier board system, which is sort of a special arrangement globally, where you have a distinctive body to control management, whereas in the US, it's all combined, executive, non-executive directors in one board. And then there is also something that is, I believe, extremely helpful from a stakeholder perspective, and that is co-determination. So in many European jurisdictions, employees are in one or the other form allowed to be informed or even participate in decision making at the highest level of the firm. And that makes a difference because, you know, the speech of the CEO needs to be different if your audience and your deciding body are employee representatives, at least partly.
That's very, very cool and interesting. When we think about compensation, because that's your special topic, and I find it really, really interesting, I can imagine that many people are actually curious about all these seemingly huge differences between, let's say, if you are in the front line and if you're in the board. And some people, sometimes, you know, those compensations are published and people almost, you know, get breathless. And if you compare yourself to the executive compensation or board compensation or, you know, CEO compensation, then some people feel very disadvantaged. Do you have an argumentation? How would you go about, I mean, I can imagine that you always hear these questions. Why is there such a huge difference between the top and the very bottom?
I'm not sure if this is the right way to tackle the issue. But you're absolutely right. We as a society need to decide to some extent what level of inequality we accept. Because inequality is also a driver in our economy and in our society, that people want to reach something. But this function is structured in a way that when this distance becomes too much, it turns out to be dangerous. What is interesting, if you ask people from a firm if their CEO makes too much money, they often don't have the same criticism than the broader public, because they have a better understanding what the achievements, etc. But the equation is endangered when pay is not justified by performance. And when it's not done in a transparent and professional way. So these are the ingredients. And yes, we were talking about US a lot. US and Europe live on very different planets when it comes to compensation. So there is a big cross-Atlantic gap, I portray it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Michael, questions are coming in. So one question is about the Corona crisis. With the Corona crisis, the discussion around universal basic income has been intensified around the world. What do you think about that?
There are a couple of countries that in larger or smaller experience projects try to find out what that does. My own opinion is, first of all, where is it coming from? It is coming from a sort of perception that labor-oriented work in a world where artificial intelligence and robots will take care of everything, we will not have enough work for everybody. So we need to find other ways of paying people and help them with their income. I believe that work for most people, if not all people, is purpose-driven. So it gives purpose to your life, it gives structure to your life, etc. So being paid just by for laying on the beach and writing your poems that you always wanted to write, it is, from my point of view, a little bit short-sighted, to be honest.
Well, and it's also,
you seem very concentrated, Seda. I can see that.
I was just looking at my eggplants. How is your food going?
Yeah, it's doing fine. It's doing fine.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. And when we think about, you know, the this notion of the artist laying at the beach, writing a poem, not caring about anything, I think that's also wrong. Some of the most disciplined people I have ever met were artists. They wake up in the morning, they just go to work, you know, they go to their desks as everybody else would do. But you have also touched upon a very interesting topic. You said machines being on the verge of, you know, taking over some of the repetitive jobs, and AI being developed in such a way. You have co-founded an ethical tech community, ethical tech commission for technology and HR topics. Let's talk about that a little bit. What are some of the big issues that you see coming up on us?
You know, about 5 years ago, I was very fascinated from the startup scene, especially when it comes to HR-related topics. And I, together with others, we started the HR Startup Award, now in its 5th year. Actually, in a couple of days, the 3 finalists will be decided by the audience for this year's winner. And we screened about 150 different business models up to now. And what we came into is that there are a lot of solutions where artificial intelligence comes into play. And every application of artificial intelligence is different. And in the HR context, that is probably one of the most sensitive issues you can find. Imagine an artificial intelligence finding out who is your employee with the highest potential. That sounds very fair and very objective, but when you then know that artificial develop decision patterns that are based on the data you feed them, just think about feeding an artificial intelligence with the CEO data of the last century and let them propose a great candidate. Guess what? No woman would be ever proposed because it cannot be found in the data. And so there are normative questions like female quotas, inclusion, minorities, etc., are normative questions that we decide as a society. And artificial intelligence, unfortunately, is not intelligent in a human sense. Yeah. So we found a necessity to break that discussion around artificial intelligence down to an applicative level, because it's a different thing if you ask your Google to find the fastest way from A to B, or to ask which of your colleagues should be promoted. And by that discussion, we formed a ethical commission that I had the honor and pleasure to co-chair, and we had a learning phase. We had intense discussion. I participated in a couple of commissions myself. It was probably the commission where all people, even, to the highest level that were there, were really personally involved, because we were talking about values, and values is something that people have a sort of emotional attachment. And we published 10 guidelines. We had a broad public discussion with more than 100 people writing and making statements and suggestions. And we published the final results this year, actually. And we got great response, and we will continue working on that. And it was really, it was fun, because some very simple questions turn out to be very complicated when you really start to drill down to the bottom.
Absolutely. And I find it really a very, very honorable thing to do, because of just the reasons you've mentioned. And similar things also apply to, when you write an application to apply for a job, not even about promotion if you're already within the company, but if you're very new and you just are fresh out of a school, most of those applications are filtered through AI. And if you're not fitting certain criteria, then you will be sorted out, although you might be a very, very good fit for a certain company with lots of passion. Well, there is actually a last question. Do you think that the regulation of AI is the solution to solving the bias problem in machine learning? Well, that sounds a very technical question, but do you think about
it? There are a couple of, AI cannot be addressed in general. Yes, it can. So questions like if white men are doing 90% of the programming, can it be diverse? That's some macro questions that need to be answered. But it is very different. For example, if you take an X-ray for cancer detection, then there is, it's a mathematical problem that can be solved because it's a sheer amount of data. And in the meantime, AI detects to some extent better than doctors on X-ray photos if you have cancer or not. But this becomes very different when AI supports decisions. Now, the GDPR, the data protection in Europe, requires human beings to make the final decision. But when an AI develops a score that becomes very binding, psychologists call it a reference point. A good example is in the US. But when you're doing a crime for the second time, there is a program that delivers a score if you can stay at home or if you need to go to jail. Of course, the judge is doing the final decision, but he needs to argue against that reference point from an AI. And if you translate that to HR, I believe it becomes obvious what's the challenge in there.
Absolutely. Well, how's your food going? Look, see, these are my eggplants already
This is my cauliflower.
Awesome.
I cheated a little bit, but it's only very few ingredients. That's a tahine sauce. It's with sesame, and then of course my pizza.
It's amazing. Look at this. You have a very lucky wife. And some garlic yogurt. Don't put the yogurt on the eggplant. Just put it right before you eat, because otherwise it dries out. So don't put them together. Well,
but it looks great.
It tastes amazing, really. Everybody should eat fried eggplants. Make fried eggplants great again. Well, that wasn't my joke. What is your joke?
No joke prepared for today, but given that in the US, the Republican convention just ended, I'm not sure if all the audience finds your joke that funny, Seda, to be honest.
No, this wasn't my joke. This was just a silly commentary. My joke is coming up. It's an HR joke.
Okay. Oh, that I'm very interested in. Seda, shoot.
Oh, I go first? Okay, well, the hiring manager asks the guy, well, you can't ask for so much money. You have absolutely no experience in this field. The guy answers, of course I ask for so much money. It turns out it's so much harder to do the job if you have no idea. Well, okay.
I didn't prepare a joke. Am I required to tell a joke here?
Yes.
It's not HR related at all.
Okay.
Somebody is driving in his car and coming to a tree in an alley, and there's sitting someone in the tree making Guys, okay, goes on a couple of 100 meters further down the alley. There's another one sitting in the tree. So he moves on, already a little bit disturbed. And then finally he comes to a guy sitting in a tree, just eating fruits from the tree. And he stopped and said, oh, it's so great to meet you, a normal person. You can't imagine, I just passed 2 trees and there were sitting people on a tree making and this guy says, oh, they're so far.
Awesome.
I didn't prepare a joke, so.
Well, this was really good, very spontaneous. So obviously you also have a huge joke diary like myself. Michel, I want to thank you so much and for joining me tonight, for taking your time, for preparing this amazing food. It's one of those episodes where I'm really sad that I'm not in the same room as my guest.
Me too. I like your eggplants.
Well, please stay in the line for a short after show party while I say good night to the people of the internet. Next week, Friday, we will see you here at My Entrepreneur's Kitchen. This time, the topic is going to be around education, which is very, very important right before the schools in Austria start again. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Have a great weekend. Take care.